couple of months, you gave me an opportunity to talk about HCON Resolution 107, and I really need your help. And more important, I want the listeners to your show to pick up the phone and call them members of Congress and ask the members of Congress to join in this effort to make sure that Congress meets its constitutional responsibility and not allow a president of the United States on their own decision to just bypass Congress and bomb a country, as you made reference to Libya, and you were exactly right. This bill right now, and being on your show, I was on the LaRouche show over the weekend, and we're going to do as many shows as possible. We need the listeners to pick up the phone and call their member of Congress right there in the district office, whatever state they're in, and say, I want my congressman to go on HCON Resolution 107, and that's what we need to happen. We need a hearing, and we do have the ear of the chairman of the Judiciary Committee. His name is Lamar Smith from Texas, and we've had a lot of interest, thanks to you and others, from the state of Texas about this constitutional issue. So we would like to get a hearing sometime in July. And Alex, the way this place works on any issue, you've got to get a hearing before the committee moves it to the floor. And I think if we could get a hearing with 2 or 3 panels of experts on the Constitution, I think we could really convince Congress that we need to move this resolution forward. So being on your show is very special, and I appreciate it.
Oh, are you kidding, sir? We want to thank you for having the courage to bring forward this and to work with Ron Paul's office. I know that his presidential campaign advisor, constitutional scholar, Bruce Fine, constitutional lawyer, helped draft it. It's absolutely constitutional. We're about to go to break and come back and go over those areas. And then if you've got phone numbers or who we should call, who specifically should we talk to?
We've got phone numbers, and we'll share that in the next break.
Amazing. We're about to go to break in about a minute. Separately, explain to people why it's unconstitutional for a president to launch a war without a congressional approval.
Well, it's pretty explicit in the Constitution, and we have bypassed this for so long, going back to the Korean War, and it's in Article 2, Section 4 of the Constitution. And Alex, I'll tell you, I was with the group in 1999, a couple Democrats, but mostly Republicans. We went to the federal courts on President Clinton deciding to go into Kosovo and bomb Kosovo. The courts threw it back out because the courts always say, well, Congress has the authority to cut the budgets when you go to war. Well, we never do that. Then again, in last year, Dennis Kucinich and I were the 2 leads, and 2 Republicans, Ron Paul being one, and 2 Democrats. So they made 3 Democrats counting Dennis and 3 Republicans counting me, Walter Jones. Which we went to the courts again on Libya. We thought we had an excellent opportunity, legally speaking, and the courts kicked it out and said, no, you've got the authority to cut the funding. And Congress will never cut the funding, and I'm not going to be critical, but when you got kids over there giving their life for a country, you would hate to think, well, if I don't vote for this, they might not get the ammunition they need to defend themselves.
But that's kind of like the chicken or the egg, because if you're sending them into a fraudulent war to begin with, in the whole war, you won't need the ammo. Stay right there, Congressman. We're going to come right back on the other side and break all this down and give out some phone numbers to try to get this bill out there on the floor. This is Alex, Congressman from North Carolina, is our guest, and he is the man who introduced the legislation to pass a law that simply enforces the Constitution, that if Obama launches one more military operation and tells Congress openly, I don't need any authorization from you. Because since the police action of the Korean War, they don't call it a declaration of war, but still they get a congressional authorization and funding, and Congress gives the go-ahead. And for those that don't know, the president isn't even the commander-in-chief until the war is declared, and then he's the executive. The Congress says, here's the money, here's the enemy, here's what you do. Now you go out and command them, George Washington, basically, okay? That's what happens. Now it's just commander-in-chief, and the Congress doesn't count, and they operate like potted plants or a ceremonial, vestigial, something of a bygone age. And we saw the spectacle. I'm going to play a video clip of this coming up after the congressman speaks some, because he needs our help, and we need to help him because we're all Americans in this together. He's had the courage to do this against these criminals, because it is criminal to launch a war. the congressional approval. It's treason. But the point is, we saw the spectacle a few months ago of the Secretary of Defense and others saying, hey, we don't need you anymore. We have the UN authority. And Obama's letter saying, hey, I don't just do this on my own. He went even further. We have the UN saying so. Unbelievable. Now, Representative Jones has introduced a piece of legislation, and he's going to give you the number, everything about it, and he needs your help to get it rammed out of committee, okay, because they're trying to procedurally block it. You notice you're seeing a media blackout on this, so media across the country, you need to have Congressman Jones on, and people need to get, when Ron Paul's on, ask him about this, because Ron Paul's supporting it, and his head policy advisor helped write this, constitutional lawyer Bruce Fein. Congressman, you've got the floor. Thank you so much for coming on with us. What are we facing right now, and how can we get the Constitution enforced?
Alex, thank you for your comments, and you really nailed it, but let me add to those as well. As I mentioned earlier, I was part of a group that in 1999 went to the federal courts by saying President Clinton should not have bypassed Kosovo. Kosovo, excuse me, and he really did bypass Congress in a way. And then Dennis Kucinich and I, Ron Paul, we went to the federal courts a year ago with Jonathan Turley, professor at George Washington University, constitutional lawyer, to say to the federal courts, Obama should not have gone to Libya the way he did. He bypassed the Constitution, in our opinion, and he bypassed Congress. And that's why this is so important. We need to have a debate. This is a vehicle for debate. It's H-Con Resolution 107. In fact, your listeners can just say HCR 107. HCR 107. And let me read very briefly the title, Expressing the Sense of Congress that the use of offensive military force by a president without prior and clear authorization of an act of Congress constitutes an impeachable high crime and misdemeanor under Article 2, Section 4 of the Constitution. And Alex, if your listeners would please write down this number, it's 202-224-3121. Let me repeat one more time. 202-224-3121. That is the United States Capitol switchboard. All the listeners have to do is to call that number and say, I would like to speak to Congressman X. And then they would put him into the office of Congressman X. And the person that answers the phone, what that individual should say is, I am so-and-so, this is my congressman, I want to ask him to join HCR 107 and help Congress get the nerve it needs to defend the Constitution when this country goes to war. It's not fair to our military, it's not fair to men and women in uniform, and it's not fair to the taxpayer when we have a president, I don't care if it's a Democrat or Republican, that bypasses Congress to go to war. Let's go back to what the Constitution requires, is a declaration of war.
Congressman, I want to continue on this line with people. Folks, you need to call and tell them to get behind this resolution, 202-224-3121, 202-224-3121. This obviously is extremely newsworthy that Ron Paul, yourself, and others have done this. And the fact that there's been almost no media coverage since you first did this, a month and a half ago or so, and time sure flies, shows that they're scared of this genie getting out of the bottle. This is a big deal that not only did he launch the war in Libya, but when it was brought up, he put out a letter saying the UN gives me authority. I mean, that is beyond just launching a war and the president doing it on his own, which is totally unconstitutional. But it's the UN doing it, and it clearly it violates Article 1, Clause 8, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 11. Again, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 11. Clearly, Congress is over all of this. That's not our opinion. It's a fact. And so it's even worse for the president to do this and say the UN gave him the authority. Now there's all sorts of stuff going on backing Al-Qaeda. Even the LA Times admits Al-Qaeda is being funded by the West to attack Assad. I'm not saying the Syrian regime's good guys, but compared to Al-Qaeda, how is this not a bigger news issue?
Alex, you're exactly right. I had bought the book, and I would recommend it to many of your listeners. It's called Funding the Enemy, Fed's bankroll, the Taliban. It's by Douglas Wisning, W-I-S-S-I-N-G, Wisning. And it continues to show, that's why this HCON Resolution 107 is important. Once we go to war, we forget the obligation and the commitment to the troops and to the American people by just spending money we don't have. We've already spent $1.3 trillion in Afghanistan and Iraq. That's not being paid for by Congress. That is on the credit card waiting to be paid for by the next generation. That's why HCON resolution is so important, because 107 will make Congress debate its role. We have forgotten our role when it comes to war, and that's what this is all about. And then you feel strong about it, I feel strong about it.
Well, again, think of how immoral it is to make troops serve more than one tour. Some are in their 6th, 7th, or 8th. Suicides at all-time records, outpacing even deaths from the conflict. And we're there 11 years. All of this is going on, and it's all about the contractors and these interests making money. They just want it to go forever. This is a completely sick joke, and it was never even declared. And we can't ever seem to get out of it. And then meanwhile, Obama wants to start all of these new wars. Again, ladies and gentlemen, it's HCR 107, concurrent resolution. Get behind it. Call Congress, 202-224-3121. What do we need to do to get this out of committee, Congressman?
Well, we're getting a lot of the more members we can get on the bill. I have spoken and written to the chairman, Lamar Smith from Texas, who I think is friendly to the issue, but I want him to feel the pressure of the people, forget me, feel the pressure of the people from around this country that want the Constitution protected and want the Constitution to be used if ever we're going to commit our young men and women to die.
Well, sure. I mean, I notice a lot of these mainline Republican radio shows, they just think it's patriotic to be behind wars, so they're actually supporting Obama in all these wars. You would think that they would want to cover a move to impeach Obama for saying the UN gives the president orders. I mean, he's on record. I mean, I say start impeachment right now. Why not just go right into impeachment proceedings and see if the media tries to ignore that?
Well, Alice, along the lines of what you're saying, Secretary of Defense Panetta spoke before the Armed Services Committee about 3 weeks ago, and Randy Forbes from Virginia and I was in line before Randy to ask the question. And I piggybacked on this HCON 107, and then Randy had a very fine question for Mr. Panetta, and you're right. Basically, what he says, well, we have to talk with our friends from coalition friends before we come to Congress. I mean, for God's sakes, I mean, how sad and how tragic is that thought process?
Sir, the media didn't cover it. A few months ago, he did it in the Senate. It got attention. You're saying he repeated what he said 2 months ago?
Yeah, he did about 3 weeks ago in the Armed Services Committee. Absolutely.
Wow. So we can just look that up on C-SPAN. That's going to be important news. That shows the incredible news blackout. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, no, you're right. And that's why thank you and everyone else that's taken an interest in HCR 107, because I want the American people to understand they can control Congress by saying, Congress, live by the Constitution, what Ron Paul's been preaching for years, what you've been preaching for years. And this is just a small step in protecting the Constitution. That's all this is about.
You were bringing that up during the break. You talked about it some on air, Congressman. But, I mean, again, you guys have gone to the courts, and they say, look, you've got the authority. Stop asking us.
Yeah, you're right. That's where the fallacy comes in, and